All right, guys, as you know, in our last lesson, as I already said, we began an author study on the works of Maya Angelou. What we're doing here is very similar to what we did with Edgar Allan Poe last semester. Last semester, we did something called literary criticism, which helps us understand the works of an author better. And there are several approaches, but the approach that we used that moment was called, or is called, the biographical approach. We're doing the same thing with Maya Angelou. In order to understand her works better, we're going to use the biographical approach, which says that if you understand or have some information about the life of the author, since our works are informed by our lives and our experiences, we will be able to understand the works better. In the case of Maya Angelou, it will be even more obvious in this case than it was with Edgar Allan Poe, because Edgar Allan Poe was a writer of fiction, mostly. So it's a little bit harder to detect, but it's not hard. In the case of Maya Angelou, since she, in addition to poetry, wrote nonfiction, it's going to be more obvious. One of the things that you were asked to read a couple of days ago was an excerpt from her seminal work titled, I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings. I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings is not an autobiography. It is a memoir. Can somebody tell me what the difference between an autobiography and a memoir?
An autobiography, it's when a person writes about their own life, and a memoir is about when they write about a period of their life, something that happened.
That is correct. Both are autobiographical. However, when we talk about the autobiography, that refers to the entire life of the person. When we talk about a memoir, we're talking about a period in the life of that person, but it is still autobiographical, although we don't call it an autobiography. Her autobiography, she spread through 6 or 7 volumes. This was the first volume that deals with her very traumatic childhood. But after that, she wrote more. And I think you have her complete autobiography in 6 or 7 different books. And I would like to share a couple of videos that talk about her life. Let me know if you can see them, okay? And you can, and if you can hear them. I'm gonna share. Yeah, give me a second. Give me a second to get there. Okay, so here we go.
She is impossible to define. An author, a poet, a civil rights activist, an actress, a dancer. Marguerite Johnson was born in St. Louis, Missouri in 1928. When her parents divorced, she was sent with her brother to live with her grandmother in racially segregated Stamps, Arkansas.
Black people depended upon other black people for sustenance, all sorts of sustenance, social, economic, religious sustenance.
As a child, she formed a strong bond with her brother, who gave her the nickname Maya. She was taught by her grandmother to celebrate life to the fullest. She would need to keep her grandmother's positive messages handy when at age 7 she was molested by her mother's boyfriend. She only told her brother, but a few days later the attacker turned up dead. Believing her words had killed the man,
I stopped speaking for 5.5 years. I simply refused to speak. I had voice, but I refused.
When she spoke again, she and her brother joined her mother in San Francisco. She won a scholarship to study dance and drama. While she was in San Francisco, her progressive political views began to form. At the age of 16, after quitting high school briefly to become San Francisco's first African-American cable car operator, she returned to her studies. During her senior year, she became pregnant. She gave birth to her son, Guy, and supported him working as a waitress and a cook. In 1952, she married Greek sailor Tosh Angelous and traded in her waitress uniform for a microphone. She became a singer, taking the name Maya Angelou. The marriage didn't last, but her career flourished, landing a role in the stage production of Porgy and Bess and recording the album Calypso Lady in 1957. Although she had always penned lyrics and poetry, she finally began pursuing her writing more seriously. She moved to Harlem and joined the Harlem Writers Guild.
She learned how to overcome the limitations and the challenges of her youth to achieve stardom as an artist and a writer.
Her unique journey continued when she moved to Cairo, Egypt, with her then love interest, South African civil rights activist Vusumuzi Maki. She served as the editor of the English language weekly, The Arab Observer, before moving to Ghana to work as editor for the Ghanaian Times. In 1964, Angelou returned to America to help her friend Malcolm X build his organization of African American Unity. Those plans were scrapped when Malcolm X was assassinated in 1965. The assassination of Martin Luther King Jr. in 1968 left her devastated. But along with the great joys and painful lows she had experienced, her rich life served as the inspiration for her memoir, I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings. Published in 1970, covering the early years of her life, it was a critical and commercial triumph. In the following years, more books followed, including 4 more volumes of her autobiography.
By the 1980s and 90s, America as a whole, regardless of race, had a profound appreciation of her talents as an artist, as a poet, and writer. And so now she is widely seen as a national treasure.
In 1993, she was asked by incoming President Bill Clinton to compose a poem which she would recite at the inauguration. Since 1981, she has served as a Reynolds Professor of American Studies at Wake Forest. And she has still found time to act in films and even host a radio show on Oprah Winfrey's XM radio network.
Maya Angelou emerged from prostitution and the life of a madam to become a world-renowned poet, historic filmmaker, and phenomenal inspiration for Black women creatives. This is the evolution of Maya Angelou. Before she could rise as a Pulitzer Prize nominee, Marguerite Annie Johnson would need to find her inner strength. Although she was born in St. Louis, Missouri, she and her older brother Bailey moved to Stamps, Arkansas to live with her grandmother when she was about 3 years old after her parents divorced. Maya was her nickname. In the mid-1930s, they returned to St. Louis to live with their mother. At 8 years old, Maya was sexually assaulted by her mother's boyfriend. She eventually confided in her brother about what happened and testified against the man in court. He was beaten to death shortly after being jailed, allegedly by Maya's own uncles. Terrified by the power of her own voice, despite the circumstances, Maya stopped speaking entirely. She fell mute for 5 years. In the absence of speech, Maya fed her love of words with literature. Langston Hughes, William Shakespeare, Paul Laurence Dunbar, and Charles Dickens were among the great authors who filled her days. In middle school, a teacher named Mrs. Flowers encouraged her love of poetry and stressed to her the importance of speaking for herself. Maya left silence behind and rose to the top of her 8th grade class. Her family moved to San Francisco, where she attended George Washington High School and got a scholarship to California Labor School to study drama and dance. At 16 years old, Maya decided that she wanted to be a streetcar conductor simply because she liked the uniforms, but was denied an application because of her race. With her mother's support, Maya sat in the lobby of the office from open to close every day for 2 weeks until she wore down their discrimination. She became the first female African-American streetcar conductor in San Francisco. She gave birth to her son Clyde Johnson in 1945, and he later changed his first name to Guy. Aside from waitressing and retail jobs, Maya became a prostitute and eventually ran a brothel to support herself and her son. Maya's dance training and passion for words would save her from the slums, proving she was a star destined to make the world her stage. In 1951, Maya married her first husband, Anastasios Angelos, a Greek sailor. She'd retained her married surname even after they divorced 3 years later, changing Angelos to Angelou to make it her own. Throughout the 50s, Maya was a calypso dancer in nightclubs in Chicago, New York, and San Francisco, which inspired her first and last studio album, Miss Calypso, which was released in 1957.
Rancho, hey, the man at the door, Rancho, him man, he won't let me go, Rancho, Rancho, as fast as you can, Rancho, this police holding me hand.
She also spent a year touring Europe, Israel, and Egypt as a cast member of the U.S. State Department's production of Porgy and Bess, teaching modern dance classes along the way. During the 60s, Maya Angelou was very invested in the civil rights movement, keeping close relationships with organizers such as Martin Luther King Jr. and literary icons such as James Baldwin, who weren't afraid to speak on the inequalities of the Black experience in America. She even raised money for and served as the Northern Coordinator for the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, a socio-political organization co-founded by Dr. King. Maya Angelou served as a freelance writer and editor in Egypt and Ghana, and upon returning to the United States, she was encouraged to share the details of her adventurous life in a book. Initially, she was hesitant, but in 1969, Maya Angelou published her first autobiography, I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings. Chronicling the formative years of her life up until the birth of her son, Maya's seminal work would go on to be an instrumental tool in schools because of its poetic and innovative narrative structure. A decade later, the book was adapted into a TV movie for CBS. Maya Angelou's ambition and boundless creativity evolved from the stage to the page, and soon she'd conquer the screen. Maya first ventured in front of the camera in Calypso Heatwave and as an uncredited dancer in the Academy Award-winning film adaptation of Porgy and Bess in 1959. I Loves You, Porgy, a popular song from the production, was recorded by Nina Simone and is considered her breakthrough hit. In March of 1972, her original screenplay, Georgia, Georgia, became the first screenplay written by an African-American woman to be produced as a movie. She briefly returned to the stage in 1973 for the Broadway play Look Away, which earned her a Tony Award nomination. In the 1977 miniseries Roots, Maya played Kunta Kinte's grandmother, the matriarch from which this dramatization of Alex Haley's family history from the slave trade to emancipation stems. Her next on-screen role came in 1993 as Aunt June in Poetic Justice, starring Janet Jackson and Tupac Shakur. Maya Angelou also penned the verses that made justice poetic.
Where water is not thirsty and bread loaf is not stone. I came up with one thing, and I don't believe I'm wrong, that nobody can make it out here alone.
Some of her later appearances in front of the camera include Moesha, Sesame Street, and Medea's Family Reunion. Maya Angelou's directorial debut, Down in the Delta, premiered in 1998. She became one of the first African-American women to join the Directors Guild of America. This film was also one of Esther Roll from Good Times' last roles before she passed away only 3 months after it premiered. Maya published 7 autobiographies in total, each spanning distinct chapters of her life. She also won Grammy Awards for the spoken word recordings of On the Pulse of Morning, Phenomenal Woman, and a song Flung Up to Heaven. February 15, 2011, former President Barack Obama honored Maya Angelou with the Presidential Medal of Freedom. On May 28, 2014, Maya Angelou passed away in her home in Winston-Salem, North Carolina. Maya Angelou was a woman of many, many talents, but it's her breathtaking poetry that has earned her global respect and fame. From President Bill Clinton's inauguration to the 1995 Million Man March in Washington, her words were often called upon to touch and inspire millions. Thanks for watching.
Okay, guys, are you seeing the presentation now?
Yes.
Yes, okay. Okay, so you already saw 2 videos on the life of Maya Angelou. As we said in our last meeting, she talks a lot about freedom and liberty. And you were asked to read I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings, not the entire memoir, but actually an excerpt, an extract that deals when she arrived to her grandmother's house, and you were supposed to read also Caged Bird. When you read I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings, when you read that excerpt, you were supposed to ask yourself the question, what important life events in Maya's life are covered in this excerpt? And basically what is covered here is how She was sent to her grandma's house when her parents got divorced. She was put on a train with her brother and someone that was supposed to be taking care of them on their way to Arkansas. However, the person that was supposed to be taking care of them got off of the a train in Arizona and put a sign on their neck saying to whoever may concern, and just abandoned them on the train. So they arrived to Arkansas all by themselves. Can you imagine leaving 5 or 6-year-old children alone on a train that is
If I see that, I
that
would
is
just
passing
slap that
different
guy
states?
in the head.
Pretty awful, right? Pretty awful experience. Who knows how traumatic that was for them to be abandoned that way. But they finally made their way to grandma's house in Arkansas, a little town called Stamps, which was a cotton town. Cotton was a big thing in that community, the production of cotton. And her grandmother was the owner of a general store. Do you know what a general store is? Anybody? No? How many of you live in Aguadilla?
Yo.
Okay, are you familiar with a store called La Jugueteria?
Yes, sir. Yes.
And what do they sell there?
De todo.
Well, what does that mean? De todo.
Just about a lot of random stuff, honestly.
Venden cosas de hilo como de manualidades, comida,
Exactly.
juguetes
So-
para los animales.
So chances are that if you're looking for something, you'll find it there, right?
Exactly.
So that's a general store. That's exactly what a general store is. And her grandma had a store like that. Of course, it was smaller, much smaller, but it was a place in the middle of the black community in Stamps, Arkansas, where people could go and find it, food and all, and maybe hardware stuff and things like that. She was a very respected woman in her community, and a black person having a general store back in the 1930s in Arkansas, of all places, which is the deep South, it's quite amazing. And I'm saying it's quite amazing because of the limitation that were imposed upon black people. There was no slavery. However, things were not that good for African Americans. They're still not that good today. You watch the news, right? I mean, you watch the news and you see how black people are treated, right? When you see videos on YouTube and you see the news, are black people treated the same way as white people?
Nope.
No, they're not. No, they're not. And there were some laws in effect during this time called the Jim Crow laws that were specifically designed to limit black people, to not allow them to enjoy what we call the American dream, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, which means that in the United States, at least theoretically, and it sounds nice on paper, you can have the freedom to live the life that you want if you work hard enough for it, right? That sounds very nice. The truth of the matter is different. It's very interesting that when you read the American Constitution, what's the very first thing that it says? Does anybody know? The first thing that it states is that all men are created how?
Equal.
Equal. All men are created equal. But you go to this country called the United States that boasts that equality, and sometimes you will be hard pressed to find that equality. And I think that that is very well demonstrated and portrayed in this poem titled Cage Bird. Can somebody read this poem? I had somebody read this poem in the other group. Can somebody read it now?
I'll read it.
Oh, go ahead, please read it.
A free bird leaps on the back of the wind and floats downstream till the current ends and dips his wings in the orange sun rays and dares to claim the sky. But a bird that stalks down his narrow cage can seldom see through his bars of rage. His wings are clipped and his feet are tied. He opens his throat to sing. The caged bird sings with a fearful trill of things unknown, but longed for still, and his tune is heard on the distant hill, for the caged bird sings to freedom. The free bird thinks of another breeze, and the trade wind soft through the sighing trees, and the fat worms waiting on a dawn-bright lawn, and he names the sky his own. But a caged bird stands on the grave of dreams. His shadow shouts on a nightmare scream. His wings are clipped and his feet are tied, so he opens his throat to sing. The caged bird sings with a fearful trill of things unknown but longed for still, and his tune is heard on the distant hill, for the caged bird sings of freedom.
Thank you, madam. Well read. What you have here is the Black experience in a nutshell, basically. What I mean with the Black experience, well, the experience of African Americans. As you see in this poem, it talks about a cage bird. How many birds are in this poem? How many birds do we have in this poem?
2.
2. Okay, we have 2 birds, right? And mention one of the birds. One of the birds is called what?
A free bird.
The free bird. And what else? What's the other bird called?
The caged bird.
The cage bird. Who do you think the free bird is? Because they're not the same bird. They're different birds. Who's the free bird?
White people.
It's a symbol for white people. What about the cage bird?
Black people.
It represents minorities. In this case, it represents Black people. Notice how different the experiences of these birds are. In the first stanza, this free bird leaps on the back of the wind and floats downstream till the currents end, and he dips his wings in sunshine, basically, and dares to claim the sky. So this bird soars. That is a metaphor for what? What do you think that means? That this free bird can soar and bask in the sunlight. What do you think that means? Keep in mind what in Frober we say, when you see it, our advertising, our marketing, we say dream, aspire, soar, right? What does soaring mean?
Rising, flying higher.
Flying high, right? Flying very high, soaring, flying with freedom. That's what it means to soar, to fly real high. So, but what would that mean? That would be a metaphor for what? Because we already identified the free bird. You guys said that the free bird represents white people, right? So when we say that this bird can, do all the things that are described here in that first stanza, what would be the meaning of that?
Yes, is that white people are? Yeah.
Some white people are.
Well, I mean, collectively, we're making generalizations here, right? That's what we're doing. We're not saying that every single member of that group is enjoying this. But in general terms, when you look at the free birds and you look at the cage birds, their experience is very different. Look at the cage bird. This cage bird is in a narrow cage. He's not just in a cage, but a narrow one. And what that narrowness going to do is obviously going to limit the movement of this bird. And he can seldom see through the bars. He can see, but not clearly. And these bars of this cage are made of rage. What is rage? They're not made of metal, but they're made of rage. What is rage?
Anger.
Anger.
It's a very deep, burning, profound anger. So these bars are made of rage. And not only that, this bird that is caged not only is behind bars in a narrow cage that limits him, but his wings are also clipped. This reminds me of people that have birds in their homes. They clip the the feathers of the wings to make the wings smaller, and that's going to limit the bird. The bird will not be able to fly very high or fly for a very long time. So while the free bird has no limitations, the cage bird is suffering many limitations. In addition to having wings clipped, feet are tied, but still he opens his throat to sing. Still in that situation, this bird sings. But this song is a song of freedom. So it's incredible that this bird, even in the middle of his suffering, can find it in himself to sing this song of freedom. And this is a reflection on the fact that this cage bird has what inside of him if he sings of freedom?
Hope.
Hope. And that's one of the greatest things that a human being can have, hope. Without hope, you cannot live. So this cage bird has hope. Who does the cage bird represent?
Black.
Black people. Black people. So basically what you have in a nutshell here is how different the experience of the African American and the white people are. It's a very beautiful poem, okay, that you were supposed to read. You guys were supposed to work on this chart where you compared the excerpt that you read and that poem. And these are the pages where you are going to find that material to read, and also the applying your skills section for those two selections. Today, you're going to be reading an essay titled New Directions, which deals with how another grandmother of Maya Angelou became a business person. It's a very cool essay about struggling in life and persevering and succeeding. When people are driven and they persevere, they're perseverant, people usually succeed. What does it mean to be perseverant? People should have hope, but people should be perseverant also. What does it mean to persevere? Perseverar in Spanish. What does that mean? Have you heard the word before?
Like to keep going.
To keep on trying. You keep on trying, you fall down, flat in your face, you stand up, you dust yourself and keep on walking, and you trip again and you fall, you stand up, you pick up yourself, and you keep on going and you don't stop. That's perseverance. And that takes a lot of courage. And those are things that people need in life, right? So we can see that in this selection, we're gonna see perseverance. Very, very cool story or essay. And there's another poem titled Woman Work. This one is a catalog poem. Does anybody know what a catalog poem is? If you've never read one, you're going to be reading one today. And basically a catalog poem is a poem that reads like a list. And you're going to see what the list of, it's like a grocery list. In this case, not a grocery, it's a list of something else. You're going to see what it is, okay? You can find both selections on pages 496 to 499. And there's an applying your skills section that you're going to work on page 500, okay? And that's what's on the menu for today.